mom has a story she's told me a few times over the years, and it's one I've never quite been able to forget. It's about her and a friend she had when she was a teenager. We'll call her friend Lisa. Even though it's been decades since it happened, every time my mom talks about it, there's this strange unease in her voice, like the memory of it still scares her. Back when my mom and Lisa were teenagers, they hung out all the time. One night they were up on the roof of Lisa's house looking out at the stars and just being young. It was a clear night because my mom remembers the stars being bright and amazing. Then they noticed something strange. A bright light appeared in the sky. It wasn't a star or a plane, it was bigger than anything they'd seen before and unnaturally bright. They both just stared at it, and my mom says that at first, it felt like the light was simply there hovering. But then, just like that, it was gone. Not in a slow fade like a shooting star or a plane moving out of sight, but in an instant. The thing is, when the light disappeared, something didn't feel right. My mom says they both just sat there in silence for a moment, feeling disoriented. When they climbed back down from the roof and checked what time it was, they realized that something was very wrong. They thought that maybe 15 minutes had passed since they first noticed the light, but in reality, 3 hours had gone by. Neither of them could explain it, and my mom said she didn't even feel like time had passed. There was no sense of a gap, just the strange light, and then the realization that it was so much later than it should have been. I guess Lisa was quiet about it and didn't want to talk, brushing off my mom's questions with short answers like, "I don't know," or "just drop it." For a long time after that, Lisa avoided the subject entirely. My mom tried not to push, but she never stopped wondering about what had happened and why Lisa was being so weird about it. A few months later, my mom's family moved away and she lost contact with Lisa. Life moved on. She grew up, got a job, and started a family. Lisa became just a person in her memories, a friend from her teenage years. It wasn't until about 10 years later that they saw each other again. My mom happened to be visiting her old town and decided to track Lisa down. She wanted to know how her old friend was doing after all those years and catch up. When she finally met up with Lisa, something about her was off. Not in a bad way really, but in a way my mom couldn't put her finger on. She was distant, as if she were living in a daydream. She had this calm, almost serene demeanor, like someone who had figured out the secret to being perfectly content. They talked about normal things at first, what they'd been up to and how their lives had turned out, but eventually the conversation went to that night on the roof. My mom brought it up carefully, admitting that she still didn't remember anything about those missing hours of time. Lisa looked at her for almost too long, like she was deciding whether to say anything. Then she told my mom that she remembered all of it. Not right away, she explained. At first, her memories were fragmented, like pieces of a puzzle that didn't fit together, but she'd been confused and scared, and that's why she refused to talk about it for so long. Over time, though, the memories started to come back to her, slowly and then all at once. Lisa remembered being taken, and that's exactly how she described it. My mom said her voice was unnervingly calm, as if she were recounting something mundane like a dream. There was no fear or hesitation, just a quiet acceptance that made the story even harder to process. She said that night on the roof wasn't the end of it, it was just the beginning. After that, Lisa said she'd been taken 3 more times. The first 3 times, she said, were terrifying. She remembered being paralyzed as strange beings performed experiments on her. She didn't describe them in detail, she just said they weren't human. But the most recent time, something changed. The beings stopped doing things to her and instead began to communicate. Not with words, but in some kind of non-verbal way that she could, in her words, simply understand. She said they told her things about space, about Earth, and about herself. The most shocking thing they told her was that she would get pregnant in a specific year, but that the baby would be stillborn. They said they tried to prevent it from happening, but couldn't. Lisa said at the time she felt a mix of emotions she couldn't untangle. Confusion, betrayal, and a strange sense of inevitability. She didn't understand why they knew so much about her life, or why they were involved at all. But over time, that confusion faded, and it was replaced by a quiet acceptance. She told my mom they knew it was going to happen no matter what, and after that she would never be able to have children again. My mom asked her if it actually happened, and Lisa nodded and said it had happened exactly as they said it would. Then Lisa told my mom something that terrified her. The beings said they had taken her that night too. My mom has no memory of anything happening at all, but she has had recurring nightmares about being paralyzed, unable to move or scream. She always thought it was some kind of sleep paralysis, but said it feels extremely real, and it makes her wake up in a full-blown panic attack when it happens. Lisa said that every time they took her, she came to understand the truth more and more. She hinted that it had to do with the nature of existence itself, how everything was connected, and how the universe wasn't what we thought it was. She didn't say much more, just that once she understood, it all felt inevitable. After that, Lisa told my mom verbatim, "You'll know eventually, and once you understand, everything will become wonderful." That was the last time my mom saw Lisa for a while. She's talked to her a few times over the years since then, and every time Lisa seems the same. Calm, somewhat distant, and strangely content. She never brings up being taken or gaining this new understanding of the universe. She just peacefully and quietly lives her life. As for my mom, she still doesn't remember a thing about that night, but maybe that's for the best. I've always found solitude to be a catalyst for creativity. As a graphic and web designer, my job requires focus, and sometimes the only way I can get into that flow state is to remove myself from all distractions. Earlier this year, I booked a small, remote cabin through VRBO. It was tucked away in the mountains of northeast Pennsylvania, a little over an hour outside of Scranton. The listing had boasted serene forest views, no other houses nearby, and reliable internet. Everything I needed to hunker down and finish 2 major projects I was working on. I arrived at the cabin on a Monday afternoon. The drive up was beautiful, with fall leaves turning the winding mountain road into a mix of reds, browns, and golds. The cabin itself was exactly as advertised. A cozy, single-story house with a small front deck, large windows, and a view of the forest that stretched endlessly in every direction. The nearest town was about a 20-minute drive away. The property felt wonderfully isolated, and I was excited to dive into my work. The first day and night passed uneventfully. I spent most of the first evening sketching out ideas for a new client's logo and website, then went to bed around midnight feeling productive and optimistic about the next day. Tuesday was equally productive. I worked straight through the day, pausing only for a quick lunch and a walk outside to stretch my legs and breathe in the crisp autumn air. By evening, I had made significant progress on my projects, so I treated myself to a glass of wine after dinner and went to bed feeling accomplished. That's when things took a strange turn. I woke up abruptly at exactly 3:33 a.m. I remember the time distinctly because the first thing I saw were those numbers on the digital clock by the bed. There was something surreal about the repetition of 3s, but I was too groggy to dwell on it at first. What did catch my attention was the light outside. A pale blue glow was streaming through every window of the cabin. At first I thought it might be the moon, but it was far too bright and uniform, almost like someone had placed floodlights around the property. The color was unusual too, a cold, unnatural shade of blue that I've never really seen before. I actually remember asking myself out loud if I was dreaming. The light was so bizarre and so out of place that it didn't feel real, but as I sat up in bed and rubbed my eyes, it didn't fade. It wasn't the fuzzy, transient imagery of a dream. It was sharp and vivid. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and walked toward the nearest window. Peering out, I could see the light hitting the trees and the ground, but there was no discernible source. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. I wandered through the cabin, checking the other windows. The same light poured in from all sides, enveloping the entire house. The forest outside looked almost alien under the glow. Every shadow and texture had a surreal feeling to it. It was eerie and deeply unsettling, if I'm being honest. I found myself standing in the kitchen, holding onto the counter, trying to understand what was going on. My rational mind searched for explanations, but I was thoroughly confused. After a few minutes of standing there, unsure what to do, I decided to grab my phone from the bedroom to call my husband Mark and tell him what was happening. He didn't answer, which I understand because of how early in the morning it was. I thought about calling the police, but what would I even report? There's a strange light surrounding my cabin, didn't seem like something they'd care about. I stood there, phone in hand, debating my next move when the light began to fade. It didn't disappear all at once, but gradually dimmed, as if someone was turning down a dimmer switch. Within a minute or so, it was completely gone. The sudden darkness felt almost oppressive. I turned on every light in the cabin and sat on the couch trying to calm down. I partially cracked one of the living room windows open to see if I could hear anything outside, but it was eerily silent. I couldn't hear wind or rustling leaves or any distant animal or insect sounds, just an unnerving stillness that made the cabin feel like it was sealed off from the rest of the world. By 5 a.m., I had made up my mind to leave. I couldn't take this feeling that something was wrong, and I didn't want to spend another night there. I packed up my things quickly, stuffing my clothes and work supplies into my suitcase without much care for organization. When I walked out of the cabin toward my car, I noticed something incredibly odd. There was a fine layer of white dust on the deck and the railings, and even covering my vehicle. It was thin and powdery, almost like ash or baking flour, and it was on everything, even the door handles. I'd only been there for a day and a half, and the car had been clean when I arrived. The sight of it sent a chill through my whole body, and at this point I just wanted to get out of there. The drive home was so weird. The roads felt empty, and the rising sun cast long shadows across the mountains. I called my husband again once I hit the main highway and told him what had happened. I could tell it made him worried, but he stayed positive about it and said he was really glad I decided to leave early. I spent the rest of the drive trying to listen to music, but I couldn't stop replaying everything in my mind, trying to think of what could have possibly caused that light. When I finally pulled into my driveway and stepped out of the car, Mark was already walking out of the house toward me. I went straight to him, put my arms around him, and pressed my head into his chest. I tried to hold back tears, but they came out anyway. I think knowing I was finally home and safe made me realize how scared the whole experience had made me, and the emotions just came out. I know it might sound like nothing threatening actually happened, but it had really affected me. I've really only told this story to my dad and a few friends, and none of them have any idea what I could have seen out there. My dad thought it could have been some kind of floodlight that the owner of the cabin had put high up into the trees, but this light was illuminating everything evenly around the entire house and wasn't directional like a floodlight would be. If it were coming from any direction, it would have been directly above the cabin. I still think about it often, and the experience left me with a fear of going out alone like that. I used to love the solitude and never once worried about being alone, but I don't think I'll ever put myself in a position like that again. My husband Eric and I were driving home from a weekend visiting his parents in Little Rock, Arkansas. This was a Monday afternoon on June 11th in 2018. We were going up Highway 65, a route we've done 100 times, heading back to our house in Springfield, Missouri. That day had been really warm and humid for June, right in the low 90s, and we knew thunderstorms were in the forecast. By the time we left Little Rock around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the sky was already turning gray, and you could see thunderheads building all around. The first hour of the drive was pretty boring. The road wound through rolling hills and small towns with the occasional clearing where you could see the horizon stacked with darkening clouds. By the time we passed through a town called Clinton around 4:30, the sky ahead had turned really dark and ominous, and flashes of lightning were visible in the distance. We debated taking a different route to try and avoid the main part of the storm because I hate driving through bad thunderstorms, but we decided to keep going. Eric never worries about anything and always says it'll be fine, but my mind goes straight to tornadoes. As we continued north, we headed directly into the storm. The first raindrops were heavy and scattered, but not even 5 minutes later, sheets of water were hitting the windshield. As we got deeper into the storm, we had the wipers on full speed, and the road was barely visible. Eric had slowed down to about 35 miles an hour, but we just kept going. The lightning was constant, illuminating the clouds in bursts, and at first I was focused on the road, but then something caught my attention. In one of the flashes, I noticed a shadow in the sky. It was a sharp, almond-shaped silhouette that looked like it was cutting through the clouds. It looked massive, too, larger than any plane I'd ever seen. Not that a plane would be flying through this, but I swore I could see it moving. I didn't say anything at first, but then a longer-lasting bolt of lightning lit up the sky, and there it was again, moving west to east. I immediately pointed it out to Eric, and we could both see it now. It was low, and it looked to be right below the bottom of the storm clouds. Eric slowed the car down even more and put the hazard lights on with his eyes glued to the windshield. In a few more bright flashes of lightning, we could both see it clearly, and it had to be hundreds of feet long. It seriously looked like a dark knife blade cutting through the clouds. We kept driving slowly, both of us staring at this thing as it moved farther east, and every time there would be a bright flash, it would outline it perfectly. Neither one of us could take our eyes off of it. The longer we watched, the more unsettling it became because nothing should be in the air during a storm like this. I remember going around a long curve in the road with tall trees on our right side and losing sight of it. When the road opened back up, I looked in every direction but couldn't see it anywhere. The wind and rain were still pretty heavy, but it felt like we were starting to come out of the worst part. Eric got back up to a highway speed and we just kept going, wondering what on earth we had just seen. For the next half hour or so, it continued to rain with the lightning mostly behind us. I kept looking around, but we never saw any part of that thing again. As we got into a town called Harrison, the rain had let up and we were completely out of the storm. We stopped for a quick bathroom break, grabbed a snack, and got back on the road. We spent the rest of the drive talking about it and just how disturbing it was to see something that size in the sky, right in the middle of a horrible storm. We both agreed that any kind of weird lightning or optical illusion was completely out of the question. This was 100% there. I have no idea what we witnessed that day, but I'm totally open to any and all theories. I can tell you with complete confidence, though, there is not an aircraft in existence that looks like that thing, or one that could glide through a storm the way it did, especially being the size of a cruise ship. I've never given even an ounce of thought to the existence of UFOs or other things visiting this planet, but after seeing that, I'm on board with just about any explanation.